Hello and welcome to today's Permaculture Masterclass, where we dive deep into the many rabbit holes that permaculture opens. Just as the permaculture enthusiast eventually takes a PDC, the PDC graduate eventually goes deeper to levels of mastery and proficiency beyond the PDC. Today we have a great one called Traditional Encoded Knowledge, Myth, Magic, and Ecology of Place-Based People. Very fascinating conversation here with Erik Ohlsen the Great. So welcome, Erik. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to get into this little talked about yet vital topic.
Yes, exactly. And I, like you listeners, don't really know what's coming at us yet. So I'm really excited to just be here and be able to witness it with everybody. We'll have space for Q&A, maybe throughout, but definitely at the end. So if you have questions for Erik, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. And Erik, just to give a place-based understanding of yourself, where are you coming at us from? What's the weather like? And what's going on in the garden? Or what are you excited about in the garden, I might say?
I'm in Northern California, home to Pomo and Miwok. And actually, the town I live in, Sebastopol, the Pomo name for that, I don't know the name in Pomo, but but in English is translated as Elderberry Village.
Oh,
And
nice.
right now in the garden, the elderberries are just bursting with flower, bursting. They've
Amazing.
leafed out, they're fully blooming. We got the earth energies rising out, so everything's growing at rapid rates on the daily. Many of the fruit trees have blossomed already. Most of the apples are just finishing up, pears are finishing up, all the stone fruits have set fruit. And last thing I'll say is it is an absolutely glorious spring day out here on the temperate coast of California. And the foxes, for the third year in a row, have made a home on our 1-acre homestead. And so we get to see Mama Fox hunting around the homestead. So it's just
Beautiful.
lovely time.
Sounds purely magical. And let me read a little bit of your bio and show your website, just in case people are not knowing who you are and want to check out more. So let me see. I don't know if you see this, Erik, but hopefully this is
I see
popping
it.
up. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So if you go to ericohlsen.com, you can learn everything about Erik, but I'll just highlight a couple things from your excellent bio. It says here, Erik is a master of regenerative design, internationally recognized permaculture teacher, landscape contractor, author, farmer, herbalist, storyteller. I would expect nothing less of a permaculturist to have all these many sort of like tools in the fire, all these many skills, and a practitioner of Nordic folk traditions, which I believe is going to tie into what we're talking about today. If you don't know, Erik was the founder or co-founder, I'm not quite sure, of Permaculture Artisans and the Permaculture Skills Center. Both totally worthy of checking out. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out real quick, and I think you might even show this, Erik, is just the new excellent book, The Regenerative Landscaper. If you haven't checked that out, I think that's kind of like, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. Is that sort of like a distillation of your work for the past 25 years or so?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's a 500-page comprehensive design manual born out of the 25 years of experience on the ground. So
Amazing.
It's less theory and more, this is how we do it. This is how it works.
And what we've done and what we've put into the landscape. Okay, fantastic. Anything to add, or you want to preface maybe this conversation before we jump into slides and different sort of like tools and different sort of props and that sort of thing? What might you do to contextualize this for us?
Yeah. So what I want to do is, first off, I'm going to go in my book. Here it is,
Perfect.
Regenerative Landscaper. And while this is a design and install manual, when we think about what does it mean to be in the mindset of place? What does it mean to be enmeshed with the natural world? And we say this, Masamu Fukuoka has a famous saying, it's like, we are nature working.
Right.
And we often say in permaculture principles, we are a part of nature. It's not like nature's over there, we're over here, we're a part of that. But what does that mean in the present day context, the one that was filled with technology and global catastrophe and all these things? And where do we stand? What thresholds do we stand at when we think about traditional ecological knowledge, which is an indigenous term that speaks much to the indigenous Americas, it's called Turtle Island, and other indigenous communities around the world, which is knowledge encoded in place for thousands of years. Ecological knowledge is passed down generation after generation. Well, folks who don't come from indigenous communities might feel like, I don't have that. Nobody passed that to me. What tradition do my ancestors come from? And did they have ecological knowledge that was encoded from place and traditions that were passed down? And yes, they did. Every single one of our ancestral lineages did. And coming home to those traditions and those stories and that ecological knowledge will change you as a permaculture designer, and will help you pull back more of the illusions that were separate from nature, and weave you in an authentic way. So I want to read just one little piece from my book, which touches on this to kick off the conversation. And this is in the regenerative mindset chapter of the book. And this section is called Animism and Science. A mere few thousand years in the past, all human inhabitants of Earth, our ancestors, maintained animistic belief systems that not just aided survival in their raw environments, but also helped these cultures live in ecological harmony with their habitats. These belief systems harness taboos, seasonal activities, and mythological stories that help maintain a balance between civilization and ecology. Guiding practices developed from stories and beliefs that enhanced biological interactions in the environment.
Perfect.
The last piece here is animism is the belief that nearly everything is alive. Stones, waterfalls, tools, homes. An animistic worldview also considers the spirits of elements like trees and animals as intellectual entities, as non-human persons. This is a really important lens to grasp as we move through with the conversation. Often trees or animals are considered relatives or familial ancestors. When you believe that everything is alive, that plants and animals are relatives, when spiritual value is given to the land, destroying these entities becomes unethical and dangerous. As regenerative designers, we must bridge indigenous knowledge with the application of earth sciences. I firmly believe that both indigenous spiritual wisdom and cutting-edge ecological science must coexist, mutually beneficial to each other, to protect and regenerate what's left of the living biosphere in Earth's current phase. So just to say, there's many indigenous communities all over the world, here where I live, that are still practicing these living traditions. They haven't gone away, they haven't disappeared. These traditions are alive and well. And for folks who have been cut from the traditions of your ancestors, the ones that would have encoded how to live as a participant in the natural environment, those traditions are still alive too, in the countries of origin of your ancestors. And this is something that is really fascinating as you go, okay, so for me, one of my big lineages is the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, in that area. And I went back there last year. I went to Sweden. And these traditions are alive there. They're alive in the community. It's a completely different way of walking on the land. And so this is a bit of what I want to bring into the conversation, is how we reconnect with the practices of our ancestors and why it's relevant today. Because science is clearly one of the backbones of permaculture, regenerative design, ecological work is vital. We need science, and we need to continue our cutting edge science. So this isn't to say no science. This isn't a conversation about religion either. It's not to say, oh, now you have to embark on some religious belief. Not at all. This is to complement whatever spiritual belief you have, if you have one, the science that you have, to help you put a lens on, the ancestral lens of what it was like to live in a place for thousands upon thousands of years, to get to know the wells and the creeks and the mountains and the forests, for stories to emerge from this place. And within that is the encoded knowledge about how to live in harmony. Bill Mollison has a really cool section that always inspired me in the designer's manual called on mnemonics. And there he talks about Pacific Island communities that had maps encoded in song.
Yeah.
So they would get out on their canoes and they would be migrating from island to island, and they would sing these songs with particular rhythms of their rowing, and these songs would in time tell them where they are.
Mm.
How powerful is that, right? And this is part of an oral tradition that every one of our ancestors had in some way. That knowledge was held in song and story and myth. So with that, let's go into the, I've got a little presentation to share as we go, and we can kind of bounce back and forth between all of that. So, oops, I think am I still in there?
Yeah, hold on one sec. Get rid of this. Oh, do it again, please. There we
Okay,
go.
sorry,
Oh,
y'all.
no, yeah. People get it. We always have tech issues.
And why can I not see my share? That's the thing.
Oh, and also it might be sharing something weird too here. It looks like I see the EV Mux thing and not the
Yeah.
presentation. So you might need to do the window or the entire screen. That might be part of the problem.
Do you see it
And
now?
I don't.
Okay, no problem. Here we go. We got it. I got it. And
Yeah, and thank you for that setup. That was great. Oh, here it comes. That looks right. I
okay,
got it.
yeah. Okay, so myth, magic, ecology of place. This is a 4,000-year-old cave rock painting in northern Sweden, 30 minutes from where my ancestors are from.
Wow.
And you can see here that I took this picture. I stood at this place, and you can see here that in these rock paintings is encoded so much story of migration, story of battle, story of fertility. There are gods, there's chariots, there's animals, there's sun wheels, there's a whole host of knowledge and meaning and recorded information gathered in these 1,000-year-old rock paintings.
Mm.
So the question is, what are the ecological traditions of your ancestors, and why does it matter? Well, every one of our ancestors have an ecological tradition that allowed them to live in relative harmony to place. I have a picture here of a traditional laid hedge out of the UK, which is an amazing regenerative technology, ancient technology that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, as part of an agricultural technique to separate out pasture, to create habitat for wildlife, grow food, medicine. And around these hedgerows is an entire living tradition in what we would call traditional folk magic. And we'll get into talking about why not understanding traditional folk magic is so important here. So how do we uncover the roots of our ancient ecological traditions? Well, let me go back to here for a second. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? And it matters because look at the state of the world. Even with all the work we've done with permaculture, all the ecological design that we've done, it's being worked through a capitalist system here in the West, at least in most of the world. And it's being worked through a scientific lens, which of course can be very, very powerful. But when I read earlier about an animistic lens where everything is alive, where the trees and animals and waterways are your relatives, well, if that is part of a belief system, if you look out there on the land and you see a tree and you consider that tree a relative, it's less likely that you're going to design a development that's going to cut that tree down. It's less likely that you'll be gravel mining that river because you'll know that that is the sustenance of all life. So part of why it matters is because of how we see ourselves within the ecological community and how these traditions can help us authentically get there. So, how do we uncover some of the roots? Some of the roots are uncovered through mythology, because in mythology, in the old stories, in the old songs, we find encoded knowledge of place. We find taboos. And so, taboos are one of the most important checks and balances for a culture. And we do not have enough sort of relevant, modern day, accepted taboos about ecological restoration, about what not to do. So, for instance, as I mentioned before, if a river is considered a living spirit, and if you get too close to the waterfall, the taboo is the spirit will gobble you up and kill you. Then when you tell your children that story, they're less likely to get to the edge of that waterfall because the spirit will gobble you up and kill you. Where, of course, whether the spirit is there to do that or not, if you fall off the waterfall, that's very dangerous. So as you delve into old folklore and old folk tradition, you'll find all these really gruesome stories that actually encode ecological knowledge. They tell you what to do, what not to do, when to do things, and when not to do things. And of course, if we're thinking about timing, we have to think about seasonality. So as you dive into stories and mythology, you'll find these motifs and these themes around timing, around season, around the different seasonal celebrations, the timing of when certain things happened, like in old nursery rhymes and things like that, that are actually encoded knowledge around how to interact with the environment in a way that's safe, in a way that honors and respects the living beings there. And through this, we weave humans into nature. Now, this picture is a picture of is a depiction of a mythological Nordic story called Ragnarok. Now, a lot of modern day folks might have seen the Marvel movie Thor Ragnarok, which is 1,000% not historical, not based on the actual mythology. But this is where things get really interesting, because if you actually take the time to study the origins of the Ragnarok story, you're going to find a lot of interesting things. First off, there's a rune stone called the Rook rune stone, which is the longest runic story on a stone in the world. And on this stone, it describes aspect of what this mythological story of Ragnarok is. Well, it turns out that in the 6th century, 550 BCE, there was an event where multiple massive volcanic eruptions happened around the world. This is scientifically proven through ice core studies and everything else. And a large area of the earth was covered in a volcanic ash cloud. Now, if you read the Ragnarok story, it is essentially describing this time period, about a 3-year period. They call it Fimbulwinter, where the sun never came out. And to them, the gods died. The gods, meaning the sun, the moon, aspects of the weather, aspects of the earth, died. And in reality, they did, because you have an orange sky for 3 years. You can't grow food. You have to migrate. There's famine. There's poverty. So what does this tell us? What does this encoded knowledge tell us? It tells us about a catastrophe, tells us about an apocalypse. And then the story goes on to talk about how green life emerged again, how the people emerged out of this catastrophe. So that's how powerful myth is. It's not just made up. You have to read between the lines and take a moment to understand that there were real events that were catastrophes and wonderful things that happened as well that affected people, and they had to record that in some way to create a set of taboos to say this is how we survived, this is what happened, and this is how we survived. Now, here where I am in Northern California, there's another story. There's an origin story of the Pomo people that are here. And it's not really my place to tell this story, but because this is where I live, I want to touch on it. And part of the origin story here is that I'm just going to truncate it. I'm not telling the whole story. So in summary, there was a great wildfire, and wildfire burned all the land, and all of the water evaporated, and there was no fresh water. And Great Coyote, who's sort of like a great god of the local peoples here, ran and ran and ran with the scorched earth looking for water. It ran all the way until Coyote found the ocean and said, oh, water, and drank and drank and drank and drank and drank the ocean up. And of course, it's salt water, so not good to drink. So here's a taboo. Coyote got sick. So here's encoded knowledge. Number one, don't drink ocean water. Coyote got sick. Coyote ran across the land with this belly full of water and eventually vomited the water up, right? And that became the new watershed. That turned into Clear Lake, which is an hour and a half north of me. And along with the water came fish and life, and it ended up renewing the living system of the earth. So that's one Pomo origin story of the origins of Clear Lake. And within that story, we have wildfire catastrophe. We live in the land of fire here. We've experienced devastating fires for many years in this place. And this goes all the way back thousands and thousands of years. The people of this land have been telling stories of fire. And they still tell those stories today. So myth and storytelling and songs and taboos, they encode the origin of place. And they encode what has happened and how we survived. And of course, within all of that is a spiritual and an emotional wisdom. I mean, we live in a science technology world. People aren't as superstitious in the Western world as they once were. But do you know that 95% of the world still practices some form of traditional magic? And that within that is based in a set of wisdom traditions. So here in the West, we've put aside ancient traditions of wisdom. We say that's old primitive stuff. We put it aside and we say we take up the phone, we take up the computer, we take up the technology. Here's our access to knowledge. Here's power. Here's information. But what's happened is we've created a culture that's really sort of an immature culture, honestly. A culture that doesn't have a lot of emotional stability. You see that with the rise of depression and anxiety. It's an absolute catastrophe, especially in the United States. And what we know is that these ancient traditions, within them are encoded ways of conduct. How do we connect with each other? How do we connect with the earth? How do we understand our own selves, our own inner world, and operate through the emotions of anger and joy and frustration and love? And you see, ancient wisdom traditions have been cracking this code for thousands of years, and we should not be overlooking them because they look primitive and they don't look like they're embracing science, because thousands and thousands of years of humanity should not be looked over. If these wisdom traditions are born from that amount of experimentation of the human experience, we should take it very, very seriously. And then, of course, encoded in all of this mythology and storytelling are principles like the principles of permaculture in how we relate to the land. And that'll become more clear as we go forward. So to touch on a few things, out of all of that, some folks might be wondering, well, where is this knowledge? How do I get in touch with it? How do I discover, where is it hiding? Because it's not enough to just pick up a bunch of books. If you read the Eddas, for example, which are Nordic wisdom stories, mythological stories, that's where the story of Ragnarok can be found. It will not make any sense to someone who hasn't, it just won't make sense.
Yeah.
So it's still good to read and to understand as much as one can. But what I've discovered in the last 5+ years of focusing on and researching my ancestral lineage, ecological lineage, is that traditional magical systems, living magical traditions, is a great repository of ecological knowledge. This right here is a picture of a 2,000-year-old labyrinth that I visited in Sweden.
Wow.
there are labyrinths all over Europe. And of course, I mainly, let me just back up for a second and say, I am mostly talking kind of through a European lens here because that's where my ancestors are from. As we go forward, this is my tradition. This is what I know. But that's not to discount or not hold space for all of the ancient magical traditions and wisdom traditions here on Turtle Island, in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. It's everywhere. It's pan global. But I can only speak to what I know and experience, and so I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
But what we discover as we go down these paths is that these traditions all mirror each other. All
Right.
over the world, they mirror each other, and I'll get to a couple ways that they do that.
Let me
So
jump in real quick, and you might be coming to this anyway, but could you give us a sense of what you mean when you say magical? Because that word, of course, might trip somebody up and be like, "Wait, what's he talking about there?"
absolutely, yes, for sure, and I'm doing that right here. I'm doing it right here.
Perfect.
So when we talk about a living magical tradition, um, the action of magic, this real magic, not stage magic, not illusions, the action of magic is when you have intentional, dedicated actions to achieve an outcome. um, so when you want to have a um, when you want to have a fertile season, right? We just came around Beltane and May Day, and there's a lot of magical traditions around the seasonality of this time of year. Well, what are those traditions about? Having a bonfire and wearing flowers in your hair and having lots of sex. These are actions that are intended to infuse the land with fertile energy,
Mm.
while also infusing ourselves with the energy of the land. So it's a two-way flow. What do we give to the land in a magical way, and what do we receive? So it's ritual, it's dedicated actions that achieve an outcome, that seek to achieve an outcome. Now, we do this every single day.
Yeah.
We do this every single day. You don't call it magic, but it can be cooking a meal for your family. That is one of the most baseline, foundational, magical acts that ancient traditions have recognized it as such. So if someone is lovingly cooking a food for their family, lovingly harvesting it from the garden and preparing all the bits and putting it in the soup pot and cooking it and thinking about their family, they're infusing that food with that love, with that
Mm.
intention, and it does do something. And I'm going to get to that. I'm going to scientifically, I'm going to lean on science to help people understand that thoughts are things, and
Perfect.
they create things. That is magic. Now,
Right.
one of the foundations of every magical tradition is a practice of perception,
Mm.
listening, and connectedness. Because people who practice magic, they get their power from the living earth. And as permaculturists, as ecological designers, there's nothing more important, nothing more effective, nothing more powerful for our design practices than listening to the land, connecting with the patterns of place. And through that process, having the perception, enough perception to come to some conclusions, to see the interaction between a bird and a seed, to watch where the fox walks and why, to be able to listen to the language of birds and understand what's happening in the ecology. These are practices of perception, and this is the foundation for every magical tradition, is
Mm.
this. Um, and this is where we get our knowledge and our power and understanding. So this is deeply rooted in ecological understanding. And if we go not too long in the past, you would not be able to separate magical tradition from ecological action. They're completely inseparable. It's a new thing that we've separated them. The other aspect of living magical traditions is that they are also founded on systems of reciprocity with living beings. So often before you harvest a plant, you make an offering, you sing it a song, you give it something it likes, you ask its permission. Indigenous cultures are doing that all around the world, and all of our ancestral lineages did the same. So what is that about? I'm going to get to why that is so important from a scientific point of view here in a minute. And then, of course, intentional dedicated action. Well, does that sound like anything in permaculture? Yeah, design. Design is intentional, dedicated action. When we come up with a plan that we want to execute and we put all the pieces together and we take that time to understand place, to set goals, to understand a vision, and we put it into a plan that we want to take action on based on our perception and our listening and our connectedness. It's the same process of a magical act. And then not all, definitely not all, but I would say most folk magical traditions are holistic practices of both healing the land and the community. So there's not a separation between, like, a lot of folk healing uses things like trees, herbs, the earth, wind, forms of weather, different kinds of waters, to sort of enact the healing in the ecology, because recognizing that we are within the ecology, and to kind of have this sympathetic action that helps us who needs to be healed to have the inner kind of alignment with what's happening on the landscape. And that might take some breaking down later to understand what I mean. But it's pretty wonderful stuff. I'll give one example. There's a tradition of sacred wells, a European tradition of sacred wells, which are essentially freshwater springs that bubble out of the ground. And a lot of these wells have deities, or gods, deities, saints associated with them. And these deities do different things. So one might be really good for healing. One might be help with fertility. One might help with the health of the land. And so as part of a healing action, a magical healing action, one might go and dip into that well to achieve healing or to achieve fertility because you want to have a baby. Or you might take a rag and get it wet and rub down. Now, a couple things there. The healing power of water has been scientifically proven the world over. So folks can do their research around how water heals. Cold water, warm water, living water. That's an entire body of science. So that's already encoded in these ancient magical acts. The second one is that we also know how what we think about ourselves. If I think I'm sick and I get really scared, I'm probably going to make myself more sick. And if I'm able to sort of believe that I can get better, my chances of getting better are increase. So these magical acts also help the inner part of the human, the mindset, the emotional alignment, to align with a healing way of being. Does that make
Yeah, it's
sense?
like, yeah, it's utilizing the placebo effect rather than just dismissing it as an artifact. It's like, well, if it's so consistently positive to have a placebo effect in action and outcome, why don't we utilize it? I often thought that. So that's what's
That's
being encoded.
that is literally what magic is it's creating conditions for the placebo effect to take root. And it's what, 40% placebo, right? When they do
Yep.
those studies, like 40%
Hmm.
get better on the placebo. That's a big number. That,
Yeah.
and people have been using this knowledge for thousands and thousands of years. But not just that, but doing it enmeshed in the landscape,
That's right.
enmeshed in the living world. So they're anchoring this not just with the idea, but with actual living beings like plants and herbs and water and soil,
Yeah.
which just anchors it even deeper. So, so some of the ways that these practices unfold is through seasonal reverence and how that turns into an interdependence with the landscape. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here, but I just want to say that if we're looking for encoded knowledge, seasonal action and celebration, which is within all the old stories and old folk traditions and old mythologies. And again, don't get caught up in the illusion of religion. That's what often happens. People say, oh, Erik told me to go look at these folk practice traditions and they all sounded Christian, and I'm not Christian, so I'm really turned off by it. Don't let that actually dissuade you, because the all of these practices are older. The way that cultural syncretism has happened, where old pagan ways and new religions like mesh and interweave and such, that didn't matter so much to village people, to farmers, and like the identity of those things didn't matter as much as people these days put stock into it. For them, it was all about results. What works? That's all that matters. It just matters what works. What are the results? So don't worry about which gods are being invoked or anything like that. That for folk tradition, for farmer communities, this is widespread around the world. Those things matter less than the actual celebration itself. A lot of saints, a lot of like Catholic saints, were pagan gods. Which are just representations of nature, thunder and rain, and representations of our inner world, wisdom and love. So don't get too caught up in that. I just want to say that. And then
Yeah.
when you do go look at these seasonal traditions, you find a lot of ecological knowledge encoded.
Let me just,
And
I've been meaning to interject several times, just with the seasonal cyclical nature of a lot of these myths and figures that get sort of shrouded in religion and whatnot. There's also a high correspondence to astrological sort of bodies and understandings of the cycles of the, not just of course, the sun and the moon, but also the sort of constellations as they move through our experience here on Earth. And so a lot of like the dragon myths are connected to Ophiuchus or whatever the Greeks called the sort of dragon constellation. And there's Anubis myths or dog myths. And a lot of those will correspond with the dog constellation. So, and a lot of religious mythology and symbolism also ties to the astrological sort of like interplay of life on Earth. So I'll just throw that out there for people. There's a great podcast called Inner Verse. Those guys over there are really, really hip to understanding the symbolism inherent in the astrological bodies and sort of encoding that through language and etymology and things. It's a great listen. But I just wanted to add that in terms of the seasonality and the importance of myth, because a lot of these fantastical figures, I think, may indeed be some type of spiritual entity here on Earth. I'm not discounting that, but they also are connected to constellations.
Yeah, thank you for throwing that. Absolutely. And so as you can see, listeners, this is such a deep and wide body of understanding and knowledge that goes all the way to the planets and the galaxies, um, and 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 so we're gonna touch on here in a minute some of the astral bodies, mostly the moon and the sun, and how ancient tradition is relevant for our practices today. So thanks for adding that, Jesse. And I would also suggest Emerald Podcast is an amazing, amazing podcast that also weaves ecology and myth together in a very powerful way. So if folks are interested in more, that's another great place to go. And and you brought up the dragon myths, in which you find worldwide. Almost every culture has myth and story about dragons and serpents, right? Serpent, dragon, they're very connected. And if the deeper you go into that, you discover a pattern. And one of those patterns is that these dragon beings are also representative of all the elements. Like there's water dragon, there's fire dragon, there's an air dragon, there's an earth dragon, and often connected to things like rivers, you know, mountain ranges, lakes, springs, falling stars, meteorites. So there's a lot of, again, ecological knowledge encoded as we start to peel back the illusions and the walls that we've put up to this stuff. Touching on the strawberry and the bread for a moment. Over here on the left, you'll see this round loaf of bread with other breads stacked on top of it. I wanted to share this because this is a really cool Nordic folk tradition that you do in the winter. And so this big round loaf at the bottom is called a sokaka brode, which means seed bread. And of course, in the far northern countries, it's a very, very cold winter, very deadly winter. And the often when you come to midwinter, Yule, what we call Christmas, there's a very ancient holiday, pre-Christian holiday, that is a time to celebrate the harvest. And one of the traditions, one of the folk magical traditions, is you make a loaf of bread, a dense loaf of bread like this, called a seed bread. I made this. This is one I made this year. And I actually took a lot of local seeds that I harvested from the homestead and baked it into this bread. And during the Yule month, which happens around a couple days after solstice and is tied to moons as well, you have this bread out on your table. And you stack other breads and treats on top of it. And what you're doing is you're infusing this bread, the lower bread, with the joy of your harvest, of your merriment, of your celebration, of your feeding. The bread becomes like bringing the land inside, because it's so cold out there in the Nordic countries. It's so cold, it's frozen. So you bring the spirit of the land, of the wheat, of the grain, which is the backbone of those civilizations. You bring that inside as a member of the family. And it has a seat at the table. And you infuse it with the merriment of Yule, of this celebration time. And then when this time is done, which is usually like January 13th or something like that, you take this bread and you take it out to your seed storage for the spring crops. And you put this bread into your seed storage. You just slide it into your seeds. Now, it worked. I tried that here, and because it's a warm environment, the bread molded, so not totally good analog for Northern California. But there's less likely that the bread's going to mold, and there's a whole discussion I've had with some of my friends about, some of my college's friends about, there could be beneficial fungi and bacteria that inoculate your seeds. So then when you come to sow the seeds, springtime has come and now it's time to sow the fields. You sow this bread in the field with the seeds. And you return it to the land. And you're not just returning this to the land, you're returning all of the joy and merriment and gratitude that you celebrated during the holiday into the land as well. And I just find this practice to be so beautiful because it holds the thread that the land is feeding us and we can feed the land. But we're in this dark, scary time. So let's all join together, the spirit of our food and ourselves as family, until things warm up and then we emerge on the land together again. So this is what I mean about enmeshing how traditional magical systems, traditions, enmesh us in the landscape. Create a different kind of reverence, right? This reverence of the seasons, this reverence and gratitude for the harvest, and how that plays out throughout the year. On the right, you see the strawberries. And here in indigenous California is the Strawberry Festival, which just happened a couple weeks ago. And this is one of the greatest festivals of the year throughout Turtle Island. Because strawberries are the first fruit really to ripen on the land. And this is a tradition, a living tradition that goes back thousands of years, reverence for this time of year, gratitude, dancing and songs and healing and intentional dedicated action, what we might call magic, for the sustenance that the land provides us. And so this is the kind of knowledge we can find encoded in these seasonal celebrations and activities. And to take it a little step further, I'm not going to stay too much on this. A lot of indigenous communities also have different names for the moons. And we do find this in other parts of the world as well, that the moons, these different moons, like the wolf moon of January, the snow moon of February, the death moon of March, the pink moon of April. And then look here, June is a strawberry moon. Of course, this is going to be locally different because we have different climates. So all of this kind of seasonal stuff has to be drilled down local. Like you can't just take this and say, oh, this works for me. No. This is, if you really want to be real about it, then you have to have the perception of your climate and of place, and your celebrations will be tuned to what's actually happening. But this is just a representation of how the moon names tell us a little bit about what's going on in the landscape. For instance, you look over here at March, death moon. God, that's intense. But if you think about it, if you're in a cold environment and you're trying to come out of winter and you haven't obtained by March, there's not a lot to eat because everybody's struggling to get out of winter. It makes sense that March would be a really tough month. Because of the resources that are there in a cold environment. And you've got yourself through winter, you've eaten all your stored up food, right? That you stored it up and you ate it. And now you're waiting for that new harvest. You're waiting for the salmon run. You're waiting for the strawberries to come. You're waiting for animals to come out of hibernation. So this is encoded knowledge of place. Okay, now we're going to get into something, a topic that when I found this out, I was blown away. Going back to the Nordic traditions for a moment. So weaving a farmer's almanac. I mean, check, this is so cool. So these are runic calendars. These for those who have maybe dabbled with like runes, which is an ancient writing system. These are rune letters here. And this is a runic calendar. This is at a museum in Sweden. These are Rune Staffs, right? They look very magical, right? Like Gandalf's wizard staff. They are farmers' almanacs, is what they are. They're calendars. And this is some deep, deep place-based wisdom. So first off, each rune here represents a day. So 365 days or so in a year. So there's about 365 of these day runes. Now, there's these lower ones too. You can't quite see it. I don't have a great picture of it in here, but there's the day runes, and then there are 19 moon runes, which are below the day runes, moon runes. And these represent the full moon. Now, check this out. The metatonic cycle. The new moon will always be on the same day of the year every 19 years. The new moon resets to the same day. And that will last for over 300 years. And after 300 years, it just changes one day, resets and changes one day. So these rune calendars have 19 moon runes that count the new moon. Wow. And these calendars can last for 300 years.
That's pretty good. You don't have to carve one of these once every 300 years. That's not so bad.
No, exactly. That's ancestral knowledge you pass down. All right. So We have this staff. It's counting days. It's counting moons. So you just have to know where you are. Like whoever carved the staff needs to know, okay, this is where the new moon is on this date. Now I can project out, that it's going to change, for 19 years, it'll change before it comes back. So you'll just have to know which moon rune you're on each year.
Right.
Okay. So you've got that. And then of course, a lot of activities are moon based. A lot of the old calendars are both sun and moon based. Now enters the next interesting thing. There are these other icons here, these upper icons that you can kind of see. And actually, I'll go over here to the Prim staff to show you.
Cool.
This one is in Norway, similar to the runic calendar. It's kind of a slightly newer version called the Prim staff. So check this out. So these hatch marks are count a day. And these symbols here, you see this one that looks like a scythe.
Yeah.
And this one looks like a tree. And this one looks like an axe. And there's a knife, and there's gloves and such. These are almanac icons that tell you what to do at that time of year.
Oh, so cool.
So you go back to the rune one, they have these here too. This is the older version with the runes. But so they are saying, oh, it's the time of year to scythe the wheat.
Yep.
Right? It's the time of year to chop firewood in preparation for winter. It's the time of year to take our boats out of the water. This is how these ancient almanacs work. But not only do they do that, but then like over here, you can see on the far left, this big sun looking symbol. That's midsummer. So this is grand celebration. The sun is at its highest point. And so now we're celebrating. Midsummer is a massive seasonal celebration, reverence of the sun, reverence of the earth, that happens in the summertime there. So you also have your celebrations. Now, these Prim staffs are often connected to saints. So this is where folks who are, have an aversion to, say, like Christian stuff might get turned off. But again, you go back far enough, you realize, oh, Saint Olaf is actually a depiction of Thor, a thunder god who had all these powers. And you can kind of go back that way and see that these are rooted in deeper traditions.
Yeah.
So these became farmers' almanacs. Now let's put this all together. We're counting days. We're counting moons. We're tracking seasonal activities. And it's all on a staff like this, right? So how is this magical? So first off, I think everyone can grasp that these ancient calendars are deeply enmeshed with ecology, ecological wisdom.
Yeah.
Based on the farmer almanac style and the way they track the moons. But there's a deeper part to this. During specific seasonal celebrations, say a celebration for fertility of the land, right, for a good harvest, folks who made these staffs would use them in what we would call a magical way. So when they go out on the land to take a ritual action, like say to dance around the fire and call in the goddesses of springtime and, sing to the grasses and sing to the land and put all your love into the earth for a good harvest, one might hold this staff when doing that. And in this belief system, you're not just holding a staff with a bunch of symbols on it. You tap this into the earth, right? So the bottom is touching the earth. And now you are holding the moon, the sun, every day, every week, every month, and all the activities of the year. The entire year is energetically encapsulated in this staff. So now when you bang this on the ground and you set an intention for a good year, in the belief system of the person doing this action, I am holding the year in my hand. I'm holding it. And this is what I'm calling forth. So that's the magical way that they would use these.
Jeez. That's so beautiful. It's so profoundly, like Gosh, I have so many thoughts. I'll just let you keep cooking here, but that's a really beautiful example of what you're talking about. Very embodied, very practical, but also symbolically rich and imaginatively rich and spiritually rich. I mean, it's just great.
I know. I get the chills talking about it. It's really something. So we've got more. You ready to go deeper?
Let's go deeper.
Okay, and folks who are listening, I'm gonna do one last section and then we can take questions, but we've got to go deeper here because now I got you and you see where we're going. And so now we need to go into the plant world for a moment because this next piece is gonna blow your mind, honestly. So first off, do you know about this book, Jesse? Primary
No, I
Perception.
don't. Mm-mm.
All right, buckle up, y'all. So let me just tell you the story of this book real quick. Written in the 60s, Cleve Baxter, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So this guy is a polygraph expert with law enforcement. All right. That's a
Oh.
weird place to start, right?
Mm,
So
mm.
he was an expert with using polygraph machines to detect people who are lying, potential criminals who are lying.
Right.
Well, one day he hooked the polygraph machine up to a plant and he did a number of experiments. And this is going to knock your socks off. So with his experimentation, he discovered a number of things. First off, he did experiments where he would hook the plant up to a polygraph machine. Then he would think about setting it on fire
Yes.
and the plant would react.
Yes. I am familiar with this. What
Now,
the heck?
when I say the plant reacted, it reacted to his thought.
Yeah. His
He
intention.
didn't he didn't put fire on the plant. He grabbed a thing of matches and thought, I'm going to set the plant on fire. Boom, the plant reacts.
Jeez.
And he did these time and time and time again. The data is irrefutable at this point. After all of his experiments over years and years and years, this wasn't a one-off fluke. This was consistent documentation of plants picking up on thoughts. Now, if a plant can pick up on a thought, what does that say about thoughts? What does it say when you project an anger-filled thought on a person versus a love-filled thought on a person? Right? Because we're biological beings that pick up energy too, just like a plant. This is the foundation of magical traditions. This is the wisdom that traditional knowledge has known for thousands and thousands of years, and it's in all their practices. When we bring the seed bread in and celebrate with it throughout the winter, and then we send it back into the land, it's picked up on the intention, on those energies, and the land can pick up on it too. So I'm kind of extrapolating off this a little bit, but let's stick to plants for a minute. So one of the things that he discovered is that not only do plants respond to fear, but they bond with people, literally bond with people. And in and you can read it in his book, some of these plants will communicate over long distances. So for instance, one of these plants was bonded with somebody and they were 1,000 miles away and had I forget the story completely, and so I'm probably going to mess it up a bit, but just to do kind of do the quick version, something terrifying happened to this person 1,000 miles away. The plant responded to their fear in exact time, no delay on the
Yeah.
timeline, because they were documenting both the people and the plant. So even over great distances, plants can communicate with people. Okay, so that's the foundation for the next part. Okay, this is so badass. I've been so excited to share this with y'all. So there's something called the 9 Herbs Charm, which was written down in the 10th century. This is an Old English plant spell, an Old English plant spell that, again, written in the 900s, but because of the way that the charm, which is a written charm or verbal charm, the way that it used alliteration, rhyme, meter, and song, we know that this was born out of an oral tradition, because we know that the way that the oral tradition works is that knowledge is encoded in very particular types of songs, which generally use alliteration and rhyme and meter, because it makes it easier to remember.
Yeah.
You know, the human brain can remember 400 times as much information in song as it just without song. That's a scientific fact. So all of our ancestral traditions used song and rhyme and meter to make it easier to hold on, to encapsulate this very, very important knowledge. So the 9 Herbs Charm, the Nigan Wirte Galdur, is a healing song that uses 9 different herbs, and we only know 8 of them. And this book,
come on now.
I know. We don't. I mean, there's a lot of
mystery.
there's a lot of debate around what the 9th herb is, but
Okay.
it's not conclusive. And these images come out of a book called The 9 Plant Spells by Hildur Publishing. And they're a really cool little tiny publishing house, which gathers a lot of these old ecological, magical spells and translates them. So they translated all of the Old English, and they have a wonderful little book I'll show you here in a minute. So the 8 herbs we know: mugwort, plantain, nettle, cress, lamb's cress, chamomile, crabapple, chervil, and fennel. So these are the 8 of the 9 sacred herbs for this plant spell. Now, in the written record is a healing salve made from these 9 plants. Wow. There is a Viper's bug loss. There is a fellow who thinks the 9th one was Viper's bug loss, which is a relative of borage. And another one who thinks it might be vervain. So, you can maybe put one of those in there. Okay, so here's where things get really, really fascinating. All right. So first off, what is the plant spell? It's a song that you sing over each plant. Now, remember what we just said about plants being bonded to people, picking up on fear, picking up on joy. We know this now. Scientifically, we know that plants respond to emotion and thoughts. So if you're going to create a healing, if you're going to do healing on somebody, would it be better to have a plant that's responding in fear, or one that is responding to gratitude, joy, being spoken to in this way? So here are 2. I just have 2 of them in here. The whole plant charm is very long, but here are 2 translated versions for mugwort and plantain, and I'll read them to you. So for mugwort, you would sing this song: remember, mugwort, what you brought to pass, what you readied at Regan Meld. You are called Una, the most ancient plant. You defeat 3, you defeat 30. You defeat wisdom, you defeat air illness, which is like, colds, viruses, sickness from the air. You defeat the horror who stalks the land. So notice all of the repetition here. You defeat 3, you defeat 30, you defeat venom, you defeat air illness, you defeat horror who stalks the land. That is our indication that this is a very, very old, pre-written song, because of the way that it rhymes there. And then here for plantain, and you, way-bred plant mother. I mean, think about that, the name way-bred, right? You're open to the east, yet mighty within. Carts creak over you. Women rode over your brides bellowed, over you bulls snorted. You withstood it all, and you pushed back. You withstood venom, you withstood air illness, you withstood the horror who travels the land.
Mm.
So not only are they singing gratitude to these, like we don't know what Regenmeld, what you brought, like what that there's some mythological story or some folk tale about something that Mugwort did at Regenmeld. We don't know what that is.
Yeah, something went down.
Something went down and Mugwort had a role. Did
Yep.
something amazing, you know, like some maybe Mugwort had some crazy healing. Maybe someone was healed and Mugwort was a part of that, and it became this great story. And so we're now invoking Mugwort's power to do that thing when we sing this song. But not only that, we're invoking Mugwort to be a healer now. Through you defeat 3, you defeat 30, you defeat venom. Now we're saying what we want you to do is to bring your healing powers, right? Because Mugwort can do a lot of different things. But what we're asking you now is to do this. And here we have gratitude of plantain, whey bread. We know whey bread is plantain. And just think about that for a minute. You know, plantain will grow on the roads and the pathways, and it's edible. Right? You can eat the seeds, you can eat the leaves, you can eat all parts of it. So whey bread, travel bread.
Yeah.
You know, and so here we're invoking the fact that we love you. Look at what you do. You know, you withstand all of this. And down here, we're saying you also withstood all this sick stuff. And we're asking you to bring this to the table. We're invoking the healing power. So there are stanzas for all 9 plants that invoke, that give them gratitude, invoke their healing powers. And again, remember, we know plants can hear thoughts. We know plants pick up on emotion. And this is what, you know, indigenous folks have been screaming at people. You know, people are over harvesting like white sage, for instance, and the way people harvest and treat plants. It's like there's a living tradition here in the Americas of indigenous folks singing to plants before they harvest them. It's not just tradition. It's not just pattern. It actually changes the constitution of the plant. It has a physical, the chemicals that are released inside the plant are different.
Yeah.
And so that's, and then in the 9 plants charm, after you invoke all the plants and you sing to them, then there's an entire story that invokes a great god that talks about how all of these plants were used to heal the land, to heal people, and to heal the land. So now you're invoking even greater powers in the process, and then you make this healing salve, and now you have this like very powerfully, magically invoked, dedicatedly made salve for healing. And so we're going to pop out of the screen share and we can take questions and talk more. I just wanted to say that this whole piece, you know, everything that I'm talking about, while we're gathering encoded knowledge, we're connecting with ancestral ways, we're learning that magical traditions have ecological benefits. Really what we're getting at here is how do we weave our hearts back into the landscape? How do we look out into the world and not think you're a commodity, you're a thing? Even permaculture people do this. It's like we're going to extract yields and it's going to be something beautiful I can put on social media, and we're using the land in this way. But how do you see yourself in the land? How do you go out and build relationship with a tree? We know trees respond, scientifically proven. Go out and talk to a tree. It's not a weird thing. It's an ancient thing. Your ancestors did it. Many of our ancestors consider the trees our relatives. In fact, in the Nordic tradition and mythology, all humans came from trees. That's the origin story of people, is they came from trees. Askenembla, ash and elm, born from driftwood, life given to us by the gods. So go speak to a tree, build a relationship, build bonds, and see how that changes you. I do talk about it a little bit in my book, The Regenerative Landscaper: Design and Build Landscapes that Repair the Environment. But if you want to connect with me more on that, go to my website, ericohlsen.com. And I have more information about folk tradition practices there. And I work with folks all over the world. I'm part of an international community of folk magic practitioners that are bringing things like the 9-plant herb charm back to the surface and reworking these ancient wisdoms for today.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. That's amazing. All right, Erik, give yourself a 2-minute break because you just downloaded a ton. I'm going to play a little commercial, everybody. This is brought to you by PINA, who is I work for, so that's why we're doing this thing here. And thanks, Erik. That was great. If you have questions, put them in the chat, and we'll see you after 2 minutes. Enjoy the commercial. I hope it works. By becoming a PINA member, you are investing in an organization that exists to promote and support the permaculture movement and permaculturists just like you. From total beginners to professionals with 40 plus years in the field, we exist to fund permaculture solutions. PINA membership benefits include coupon codes, private member access to continuing education. You can post and apply for permaculture jobs, field advisors mentorship for professional development, and most importantly of all, a network of peers, colleagues, and collaborators here to support the growth of permaculture across the continent.
We want people to appreciate permaculture because of all the things it can actually do to solve social and environmental problems. We know there's at least 50,000 of us in North America who've been trained in permaculture. That's a small city, and our, albeit spread thin, has the potential to rise up like trees above that weedy lot, provide a canopy for the birds and the animals, and a gathering place for the people, and stand strong in wisdom for a very long time. And we're trying to achieve that vision, trying to transform a network, a loose network, into a more muscular organization that can put people on the ground to accomplish things.
I'm here because permaculture for me has brought me to some of the most interesting, fascinating, dynamically enabled and interactive people I've met on the planet. They're not siloed usually, so they're not just one thing. And they have a sense of how do we better ourselves? How do we better the world? And that's probably why I'm still in it.
Nope, I can't hear you, Jesse. Jesse, I can't hear you.
I forgot about the mute thing.
Oh, there you are.
What a classic modern mistake that is, leaving yourself muted, right? Well, thanks again, Erik. That was so thought-provoking and stimulating. And I guess the first thing there's many things, but let's get to a couple comments here. I don't know if you can read these or not, but that's how I feel. Fantastic.
Thanks, Lexa.
Alexa also loves the seed bread. I thought the seed bread story was so beautiful and it demonstrative of that reciprocation action in a way that is so embodied that I was like, oh my God, I've never thought to actually feed the soil the bread or feed the soil, like I do the compost thing and the vermicompost and the teas but it's what a beautiful symbol it is to both take from the earth your sustenance and then return back to the earth the thing that you're creating out of the earth. So I agree, Alexa. That was amazing. And then one other question was about the original picture that you took on the rock. Casper asked, is that in tandem? And I was like, I don't know.
It's that one wasn't in Tandem. It's about 45 minutes from Tandem. I forget the name. It's a little bit south of Tandem. When I was there, we were like on our way to Tandem, and then my mentor, an elder in Sweden, said, well, let's go to the one that nobody knows about rather than
Okay,
the touristy one. So we
yeah,
went to that one. But in the same region, in
same
Bohunian,
yeah,
same province, and probably similar time frame that they were
yeah.
made.
Yeah, and Casper also throws out. I've read that or heard this Casper something about low impact frequencies like drums and also like thunder and lightning and that sort of thing on mycelium growing. So
For
yeah, I
sure.
mean I guess what I want to sort of reflect on here is like permaculture for me, and I think many, is a lens and a way into like thinking holistically again from our sort of scientific reductionism sort of worldview. Um, that sort of was maybe the cause. I mean, who knows, right? With the actual cause of like man becoming separate from nature, the idea of that separateness snuck in like a virus or something, and it's our culture now, and it's how we're raised, and thinking of place also weaving into this. Like, I live in Michigan, but my ancestors certainly didn't. We're transplants from some European, bloodlines and mixes of traditions as well. So it's sort of like there's these two things that we're trying to learn to do, and permaculture is like a big part of the way toward that. It's like a first step. It's the first lens, at least for many of us, myself included, that is like, oh, there's this like holistic way where we don't have to just commoditize nature and just like take and take and extract. We can have this reciprocation and actually have more abundance through that reciprocate pattern. And I think for many of us, we feel like, well, duh, that's the way I've always intuited that. And now I have a system by which I can make that, abundance actually occur and participate in it and all that. But the other piece is how do we become rooted in place again? How do we become rooted in these traditions again, especially as we're often so isolated? It's like, and I do this, my magical practices in my garden, they're beautiful, they're quirky, they're cool. Like my wife and I like them, but it's not a shared story yet. It's not like my town or a small subsection of my town is participating in these or designing these sort of like mythological patterns that are deeply encoding all the wisdom that we're picking up over the years of working in our garden. So those are just two of my reflections. Like, I think what you're giving to us now is like that last lens maybe for how we can actually become rooted in place again and sort of indigenous to place again for those many of us who have been uprooted and not had those cultural roots. So reflections, please. I don't really have a question.
Yeah, no, precisely. And I think those were really good reflections. And it's tricky to talk about some of this because there's been a piece in permaculture that is, for a lot of the pioneer permaculture folks, the old school and stuff, all love to them, all respect to them.
Yes.
And part of that foundation is a very specific keep spirituality out of permaculture.
Yeah.
That was like a hardcore kind of foundational thing with a lot of the older generation, which I respect a lot because the thing is it's for everybody, right? And we don't want it
Yeah.
to be co-opted by one particular spirituality or religion, and then now all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm not part of that, so I can't be part of permaculture. So that made a lot of sense for a long time. But the problem is that that's not how people operated for the vast majority of humanity. Is that there was a spiritual basis for our actions on the land. And so I think lately what I've been discovering, especially spending time with indigenous folks and really humbling myself, there's a lot of critique about permaculture in the
Yeah.
indigenous community. And so being able to set aside ego and oh gosh, I feel misunderstood, setting that aside and just being in a listening space, what I hear our indigenous relatives sharing is it's great that we have a set of principles. It's great that we're doing good by the earth, but because you don't have a spiritual traditional way of approaching it,
Mm.
you're missing this entire body, one of the pillars of living in place,
Yeah.
which is based on story and mythology and a deeper spiritual connection to place, to trees and creeks and watersheds and mountains and stones and so in reflection, thinking about, because I've been doing 25 years now, I've been doing permaculture since I was 19. And, in my 20s, super excited, permy, going out there, I'm going to swale the world, right? I'm going to build ponds on every property and wow, let's go. there were definitely times where I created a lot of damage because my lens of, I want to create this cool permaculture says, I'm going to take this idea of like swales and ponds and food forests, and I'm going to just put it on this and let's go.
Yeah.
Maybe I cut down a sacred tree, or I dug up a stone that was, people have been praying at this stone for 10,000 years. There's to not look out and provide spiritual value to elements in the landscape is to cut off a deeper sense of connection. And so permaculture people are just as prone to go out and cause damage even through our good intentions, because we were never taught these older traditional ways. Now, one of the problems is for folks like us who are living in the United States, whose ancestors came from somewhere else, is that it's not really for us to adopt the indigenous practices, like the spiritual practices. That's because indigenous people have gone through genocide and residential boarding schools and things. It's like they've been persecuted for their beliefs, and now we can't just go take their beliefs and spiritual practices. So, but we live here. You live in Michigan. I live in California. This isn't where my ancestors are from. So the question is, and I don't necessarily have the answer, but I'm reaching with everything we've been talking about is, well, how do I be a good person of place here? But how can I draw on, in an authentic way that I have the right to, an older spiritual tradition that will help me look out on this landscape with new eyes and assign spiritual value to living things in such a way that my perception of the ecology shifts to one of love and reverence rather than commodity. And this is the subtle yet powerful shift that I think is actually really important for us to start discussing more and implementing into our practices.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at too with it. And I think what you just taught us here and showed us is a way in and a way to start to make that shift. And even if we just do it individual by individual, that's better than not doing it at all. And eventually it will probably become a broader conversation in culture, I hope anyway. The other thing I think about the critiques of permaculture and the Western mind is like, the focus on nouns and the forgetting that there is no noun, there is nothing that is in place. Everything is in context and cyclical flows. And like, we live in this sort of like we even think and conceive in these separate sort of like parts, mentalities. And that's really the key thing I think that we need to dissolve into holism again, which breeds into and ties into spirituality. But it's very challenging. I mean, we're raised in a language and a mode and a model of thinking and behaving that is very much about like a noun based living, a very sort of like object subject sort of separation and dualism. And ultimately the dualism can be helpful to understand certain things or to achieve certain things, but it has to dissolve back into holism, in terms of how we live in Michigan and how we persist over time and how all of us do that everywhere where we happen to find ourselves.
100%. Yeah. And I do want to emphasize that what we're talking about here isn't religion.
Yes.
There's a difference between religion and the folk magical traditions of place. These are two separate things. Now, religion can come into folk magic tradition and magical tradition can come into religion, but that's not the way it was practiced by most people over thousands and thousands of years. Because what we have to realize is that, we live in a time now, despite all the catastrophe happening in the world, we live in one of the safest times for humanity ever, to one degree. Climate change, there's a discussion for total annihilation. We won't have that conversation right now. But it used to be that 50% infant mortality. That was common.
Right.
50% of babies born were going to die. And we do have to kind of remember that is it was those times when spiritual wisdom, ecological wisdom wasn't just like a thing. It wasn't just like a fad. It wasn't just like, how do I be a better person or how do I do better? It was like, this is life or death.
Yeah.
Full stop. Life, death. So when you sing, when you're going to do a healing on somebody who could die, you're not just going to be like, let me just do this healing. You're going to invoke every power possible. If that power is Jesus, fuck it, invoke Jesus. If it's Odin, invoke Odin. If it's that water spirit, it doesn't matter. It's not about religion. It's about, where are we going to obtain results?
Yes.
Because I don't want to lose my family member.
Yeah.
I'm going to sing over the plants. I'm going to dip into the sacred well. We're going to do landscape, earth, forces of nature. Please help my friend, my family member not die.
Yes.
This is the basis for this. And there's all around the world, there are cultures still living like that, still living in a cultures where, the scarcity, the poverty, the death rates are still what we might consider medieval. And they are 1000% enmeshed with magical tradition, because they need to harness every possible power they can to achieve a positive result. And this isn't in lieu of science. It's like, if you have the medicine, take the medicine, and then also add to the placebo in all these other ways. It's both and, it's not either or.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I echo that again wholeheartedly, that it functions is the important thing. Like, does it grow corn, right? It's like just the perennial question. Like, it has to work. And this is how seemingly all of the indigenous traditions throughout the world talked to plants and got answers about the value of mixing this plant and that plant, and you get this result. And, the scientists go and say, well, how did you discover that? Oh, the plants told us. And we sort of dismiss that sort of like arrogantly or in our ignorance, like, well, they must mean through trial and error and talking with each other. But it's like the plant book that you showed and other scientific inquiries into that show us that consciousness is in a field, and it doesn't really matter how far away things are. It matters more about your intention. It matters that you understand and you have relationships with these plants, and then they reveal to you what they are capable of. And so then it becomes this reciprocal, like, that's why we give back to the Mother Earth. That's why we do a prayer when we harvest a plant, because we recognize that it's this give and take endlessly. So, man, I'm just so jazzed up. I love this so much. Let me share this from Casper, though, because Casper's saying, as a Swede, right smack in the middle of the country, is there any chance I can get a hookup on the elders contacts? I don't know what you mean. Do you know what he means, or Casper means?
100%. Yep.
Okay.
Definitely. Casper, you should go to my website, ericohlsen.com, and then send me a message there, and I'll connect you with Johannes and some of the other elders there for sure.
Nice.
And I'm not sure what part of Sweden you're from. In Värmland, there's the forest vin culture in Värmland, and there's some folks there who are bringing back the old forest fin culture. And this is like deep permaculture roots, like way before, this is like deep, like, how do you enmesh yourself in a cold forest environment and live, from bark houses to special stone built ovens to forest management, is deeply rooted ecological knowledge. And there's folks who are teaching it, who are documenting, who are doing the folklorist work to bring that stuff back in and weave it all back into relevant for today.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
And on that note, Erik, you kind of mentioned you were part of a global community sort of doing these, or revivifying or studying these folk traditions. What kind of group is that? Would that be something people could look into and join or participate in?
Well, it's a private group, so no, but you can look up Johannes Gordbeck. He's one of my elder mentors, and he has like online class, like an 18-month program that he teaches all the old ways, traditional magic rooted in ecology, and it's totally life-changing. And then once you go through that program, then you can be in this private group of folks who are been doing it a long time. But it's this what we're talking about is an emergent field right now. A lot of people are looking for alternatives to modern culture. A lot of folks are tapping back into ancestral lineage, and a part of that process is often picking up these magical traditions, because that's an easy way in. And so I think that we're seeing it's a funny thing to say. This next thing is a really funny thing to say, but in terms of the marketability of permaculture, one of the things that I've been feeling into a lot over the past few years is that traditional magic communities need permaculture, and permaculture communities need traditional magical systems. And in some places in the world, they're already totally meshed. But at some point, we separated them in the Western world, and to weave these things back together. So there's just an enormous emerging community of people tapping into magic traditions that like hundreds of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands just in the United States. But they don't have the permaculture side. So what permaculture brings is a kind of perception of looking at the land, of understanding landscape pattern in the like the tangible stuff, right? Like, how do we sprout a seed? How do we plant a tree? How do we manage water cycles, like in the physical? And so what will happen a lot in these magical traditions is they'll stay up in the esoteric world. So they'll just be kind of more like spiritual, la la la, and we get some ancestor stuff. We'll invoke, but then they're not implementing it in the land. So it's very one dimensional. It's not rooted. And then, like we said, with permaculture, would be very sciencey, would be very in the land, but we may not have provide spiritual value to the landscape. So we miss things because we're not seeing it through that lens. So there's some potential for permaculture to be marketed to these magical communities and really provide something powerful to change the world, to heal, regenerate, like, which is our mission in permaculture.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. So, I just have one other reflection that I feel like sharing, and I don't know, it relates to what we were talking about, but I don't know if this is just an experience that I've had, but I went back to my hometown, some years ago, and had the distinct feeling as I was driving through. I hadn't been there in a couple of years, through some of these back roads that I used to drive on as a kid, and bike through before that. Lots of just formative memories, but I had the distinct feeling that the land was sending me memory. Not that the memory emerged out of my brain, like, oh, I remember this street, but I felt this impression unfold around me. And then I was like, oh, right. X happened here, or Y happened here, or so-and-so and I connected here, or whatever. And I just want to throw that out there. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that. But the idea that this land is actually talking into us, and it also ties into, like, we're missing the song from some of those verses and the couplets that we have, but maybe the song is still there, like, in the land or something. And I don't want to get too woo-woo. And I don't think I will for you, Erik, but for listeners, it might be. But what do you think about that? Have you had experiences where the land seems to deliver either song or information to you, whether it be memory or information about the landscape itself?
1,000%, man. I mean, first off, the Sami, which are indigenous community in northern, kind of across Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia. They're an Arctic, circumpolar indigenous community. The Sami, the reindeer herders, they have a type of singing called yoke, and they would go into a landscape, listen to a river, and then sing the song that is the river. And it's really important to say it's not a singing a song about the river.
Right.
The song is the river.
Yeah.
The song is the river. It is the river. Important distinction. So this is old stuff. It goes back a long ways. And when I went to Sweden, where I went to the landscapes of my ancestors, I went to the old farmland that my ancestors held for over 500 years, which for us in the United States, if you haven't gone back to where your ancestors were farming for 500 or 1,000 years, it's an experience, right? And I walked on that land and I felt something I can't even put into words. I mean, I just started to cry, and there was nothing happening. It was just very quiet. It's just, I walked out on that land and I felt a sense of home that I cannot put into words. And my friend, my long lost relative, who I discovered when I was there, she said, the teeth and bones of your ancestors are in this soil right here that you're standing on.
Yeah.
Man,
It's
that
like, wow.
that hit me so hard.
Yeah.
Because it was a feeling of the land. Like I could hear the story of, I could feel my own veins, like kind of
Mhm.
enter into the land. And it's a sense of, that's hard to put into words, but a more specific story to what you were describing. There's an old tree that I've been visiting for a number of years, like a 250-year-old oak tree, here in my, just a couple miles from me. And actually, my book, The Regenerative Landscaper, I wrote the first draft of this book almost exclusively underneath this tree.
Oh, wow.
So I'd hike out to the tree and I'd sit under the tree and I'd write. And I would regularly make offerings, songs, or like other things like different waters, or, hydrosols, different things like that, or just
Mm.
flowers that I picked. I would always make an offering to the tree when I would get there. One day, I went out to the tree, I made an offering, I sat down, I wrote, I came home. That night, I was in the shower. I'm sitting there in the shower, and all of a sudden, the tree pops up in my mind. It's like, oh, the tree, I'm thinking of the tree. And then, in my mind, it said, hey, look behind, look on your back, look on your back. And I look over, and oh, there's a tick.
Oh.
There's a tick biting me right on the
Mm.
like on my hip. And that was one of those moments where, whoa, wait, what? Did
Thank you.
did this tree just tell me about warn me about a tick? Like, did that really happen? Like, these things happen. How can you describe them? How can you explain it? I mean, that's literally was my experience, right?
Yeah.
And so that sense of, I have a bond with this tree. I've been giving it offerings and singing to it and writing under it. It's been my muse. And here it's like, hey, check yourself.
Yeah.
There's a tick biting you.
Yeah.
These things happen.
Yeah.
This is what folklore is born from.
That's it. So listeners, don't shut those little wisp of intuition or ideas that come into your head. Don't shut those down, because I do believe that they do happen. And I wonder, as I'm getting older, I don't know that I can quantifiably say this, but I wonder if they grow. The more we do, the more we interact with our landscapes and make offerings, and the longer we feel that rootedness grow within us, even if we are transplants. That I wonder if it's, it continues to, the whispers get louder or more frequent, the communications come easier. But we just have to be open to the idea in order to allow them in. Well, with respect to your time, Erik, I want to give you reprieve here and just say thanks once more. This was really fantastic. I'd love to end with just one simple question, which, you could take in any direction you want, but like, we're trying to get impact stories, because as a permaculture educator yourself, the impact of permaculture on people's lives can be totally transformative. So I wonder if any aha impact stories come to mind from either you upon discovering permaculture or working with permaculture, or your students, that sort of are emblematic of the impact permaculture can have.
Yeah. Well, the I would say where I live now is the longest I've ever been in a place. So I've been here for 9 years, and it was a eucalyptus forest. And we took down all the eucalyptus because very dangerous tree to have, with kids running underneath them and stuff.
Mm.
And so my aha happens almost every day when I walk outside, because we are now immersed in a mature food forest. Every year, the diversity of birds is increasing like tenfold. And this year, new songs I've never heard, new birds I've never seen before, emerging. And what's starting to happen is, through the process of a fully no-till 1-acre food forest planted with 150 fruit trees, thousands of herbs and veggies, is a evolving ecosystem. A full ecosystem is evolving. Now the fox has been here, has the third year in a row that they've built their den here on this acre. We're the only frog song in the whole upper neighborhood. Like down at the bottom, there's frog song, but in terms of this upper neighborhood, repeatedly folks have said, never heard frogs here before. Now every year there's frogs. So when I walk out onto this landscape where you can harvest something to eat 365 days of the year, and I still discover new species, new layers of complexity that are emerging every year, I just am so humbled by it, you know, and it works. Like, this is what I'm saying is it works. The work that we do with permaculture, it works. It provides abundance. It heals landscape. Not a single drop of water goes off this property. It used to be that there was like drain pipes and stuff, and water would pour off. Now, not a single drop of water goes off the surface, right? Subsurface, yes, but on the surface, no. This stuff works, but it is good if you can, not, and this is a privileged thing, if you can build a relationship with a place for a period of time. That's when you really understand just how well it works. I've built literally hundreds of permaculture systems, from small gardens to big farms, over the decades. Usually I leave them, you know, after they're done.
Yep.
And sometimes I get to go back and see them mature, which is cool. But be in daily relationship with one is a life-changing, exciting, empowering, joyful experience.
Yeah, I agree. As Peter Bain said, I just interviewed him. He said it gets better and better every year, you know, and I'm lucky enough to have lived in the same food forest now that I built for going on 8 years. And same thing, just unbelievable beauty. I'm like, gosh, everybody should live in one of these. You know, you want to die in a food forest. You want to die in a forest garden, because even if you break your leg or something for the last few years, you can just amble around, and there's just this abundance and beauty and life essence. It's just wonderful. So, Erik, this is great. Anytime you have updates or interesting weaves on this track and you want to have a conversation, please reach out. This is just fascinating. I kind of think it's a little bit of the cutting edge of permaculture, one of them anyway. And I think it's important to have these conversations and see where they grow over the years. So thanks again, Erik. And everybody go see ericolson.com if you want to know more and buy his book and interact with him in that way. And thanks everybody for being here in the live chat. It was great to get to know you a little bit. And a final word to you, Erik, if you want.
Well, thank you for a platform to have this conversation. Thanks to everyone who joined, and just reach out to me, and let's keep unraveling the threads of the old ways and making them modern, relevant for today.
Beautiful. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Bye.